Have you ever wondered why France has been so deeply involved in Africa, particularly in the Sahel region? Former French President Jacques Chirac once stated that France would become a third-world country without Africa. Now it seems like that's becoming a reality as France and its corporations are facing significant losses after being kicked out of Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. Recently, it was revealed that Air France has suffered a collective loss of 65 million euros because it was expelled from the Sahel. This loss has been so severe that Air France is eager to return to the region. However, leaders like Ibrahim Traoré from Burkina Faso, along with military leaders from Mali and Niger, are determined to prevent that from happening. In this video, we'll explore France's desperate efforts to regain its presence in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, and the impact it's facing from these recent losses. For decades, France depended on Africa for its economic stability, extracting resources while maintaining significant geopolitical control. However, everything changed when military leaders took power in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Their rise marked a pivotal moment for France, one that has left French companies and the country itself reeling. The expulsion of French troops, corporations, and political influence from these countries has shattered France's economic grip on the region. One of the most visible signs of this loss is the financial blow to Air France. The airline has lost over 65 million euros since being pushed out of the Sahel. For Air France, the region wasn't just another destination, it was a gold mine. The airline generated staggering daily revenues, 500 million euros CFA from Mali, 430 million euros from Niger, and 390 million euros from Burkina Faso, totaling over 2 million euros per day. This massive profit highlighted just how dependent France was on the Sahel for its economic survival. And this is just one company among many. But with the rise of military-led governments in these countries and their strong opposition to French dominance, Air France has been forced out, severing a key revenue stream. The result has been financial devastation for both France and its businesses in the region. The situation has turned into a catastrophe, leaving airlines struggling to regain access to the region. However, the new governments in the Sahel have made it clear that the days of France's unchecked exploitation are over. The leaders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger represent a new era of African governance, one that prioritizes sovereignty and independence over submission to foreign powers. These revolutionary leaders have taken bold steps to break France's economic and military control over their countries. They understand that France's leverage in the region was built on the financial benefits it extracted from Africa. By cutting off these resources, France will lose the financial power that supports its international influence. For a long time, France has presented itself as a symbol of economic strength and industrial power. But much of its success was based on resources it didn't actually own. Despite having minimal reserves of gold, uranium, and other critical minerals, France remained a major exporter of these commodities for decades. The catch? These resources weren't French, they came from Africa. France extracted them from its former colonies, processed them, and sold them as French commodities, while African countries remained underdeveloped. A prime example of this exploitation is gold. France doesn't have significant gold mines, yet it has exported huge amounts of the precious metal. The real source of this gold has always been West African nations like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, where French companies controlled the mining operations under unfair contracts. These deals ensured that African nations only received a fraction of the wealth, while the gold was refined in France and sold under a French label. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni even exposed this on live TV, calling out France's practices. Now, with Sahel nations reclaiming their resources and kicking out French companies, France's so-called gold exports have nearly vanished, highlighting just how dependent France was on African wealth. This pattern extends to other essential minerals as well: uranium, cobalt, and lithium, key materials for modern technology, electric vehicles, and batteries. France has little to no significant reserves of these minerals, yet it has remained an important player in the high-tech industry. But as Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali reclaim control over these resources, France's grip on the global market is weakening. The rejection of French influence in the Sahel is not just about gaining political independence, but also about dismantling the deep economic dependence that has kept Africa subservient to France. This movement gained momentum through a series of military coups that reshaped the power dynamics in the region. The overthrow of pro-French governments was more than just a local political shift. It was a direct challenge to France's neo-colonial control. France reacted with fury, trying to impose sanctions, cutting diplomatic ties, and isolating the new governments. However, these actions only accelerated France's decline in the region. Instead of succumbing to external pressure, the new leaders expelled French troops, shut down French embassies, and took control of key industries that had once been under French corporate dominance. One of the most significant and financially damaging blows to France was the removal of Air France, severing a major economic link that had benefited France for decades. For years, Air France was more than just an airline. It was a crucial economic tool that helped France maintain control over African air travel. The airline monopolized routes, dictated key connections, and extracted wealth from the region, while contributing little to local economies. Air France held near total control over flights between the Sahel and Europe, keeping fares high and providing subpar service compared to other international carriers. This system funneled vast amounts of money out of Africa and into French corporate coffers, reinforcing France's economic hold on the region. When the revolutionary governments took power, they began questioning why Air France had such free rein while offering so little in return. When the airline suspended flights in response to the political shifts, the Sahel nations reacted by banning Air France from returning and exploring alternative partnerships. Mali's foreign minister Abdoulaye Diop openly criticized the airline's arrogance and exploitative business practices, pointing out how it frequently canceled flights without accountability, leaving African passengers stranded in Europe and elsewhere. He emphasized that such reckless behavior would never be tolerated in the US or other Western nations. Yet, Air France continued to act with impunity. France once felt it could operate with impunity in Africa, but that era is now over. As one leader put it, if Air France wants to return, it will have to queue up like any other company, without privileges or special treatment. France no longer holds control. Africa does. But if the Sahel nations have successfully expelled France and its corporate interests, why is Air France so desperate to return? The answer is simple: economic survival. Losing the Sahel has been a devastating blow for France. French corporate dominance was built on the ability to control African markets, ensuring that everything from uranium to air travel stayed under French control. With that system now crumbling, France faces an economic crisis it can no longer ignore. Air France's expulsion is just one part of a much larger collapse. One of the hardest blows to France came from Niger, which has been the backbone of France's nuclear energy industry for over 50 years. Orano, previously known as Areva, France's largest nuclear energy company, relied heavily on Niger's uranium mines to fuel a power grid that provides more than 70% of France's electricity. Before the coup in Niger, the country supplied almost 35% of France's uranium at exploitative prices. Yet Niger itself only received about 5% of the profits from its uranium sales, while France took the rest. When Niger's new military government took power in July 2023, they immediately suspended uranium exports to France, accusing Orano of exploiting the country's wealth while leaving its people in poverty. The consequences for France were swift and severe. French nuclear plants, which were heavily dependent on Niger's uranium, scrambled to find alternative suppliers from countries like Canada and Kazakhstan, but at much higher costs. Orano's mining operations in Niger were halted, leading to billions of euros in projected losses. More importantly, France lost its cheapest and most reliable uranium source, raising its domestic energy costs and threatening its energy security. Meanwhile, Niger has begun renegotiating uranium deals with Russia and China, effectively ensuring that France will never regain its monopoly over Niger's uranium reserves. Beyond uranium, the Sahel region is rich in other valuable minerals like gold, lithium, and cobalt, further complicating France's situation. For years, French companies have extracted resources from Africa with little compensation to local governments. But with Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso now prioritizing resource nationalism, France's mining industry is rapidly collapsing. Gold mining, once dominated by French-backed firms, is now shifting to new partners. Mali, Africa's third-largest gold producer, has expelled French mining companies and is now collaborating with Russian and Chinese firms. Burkina Faso, which produces over 50 tons of gold annually, has imposed strict regulations on French companies, making it nearly impossible for them to continue operations. Niger has also revoked several gold mining permits previously held by French companies, cutting off yet another revenue stream that once flowed directly to Paris. Before we continue, if you're enjoying the video, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more content about Africa. Let's keep going. The collapse of French gold mining interests has hit major corporations hard. Endeavour Mining, which has deep French ties and significant operations in Mali and Burkina Faso, is now facing severe restrictions and the potential nationalization of its assets. The Bowler Group, which once controlled the logistics and transport for French mining companies in the region, has lost key contracts and is being quickly replaced by Chinese and Russian logistics firms. With these developments, France's ability to extract wealth from Africa's gold resources while keeping local populations in poverty is coming to an end. Another major blow to France's declining economic control in Africa comes from Total Energies, the country's largest oil and gas company. For decades, Total Energies dominated major oil fields in Chad, Gabon, and parts of West Africa, securing cheap energy resources at the expense of African nations. But as Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso sever their economic ties with France, Total Energies is seeing its once profitable operations grind to a halt. Niger has frozen oil exports to France and is now prioritizing trade deals with China. Mali and Burkina Faso have also turned to Russia and Middle Eastern nations for energy partnerships, effectively sidelining Total Energies in the region. Without access to these African energy reserves, France is losing its grip on a vital source of power and wealth. France is increasingly reliant on expensive imports from the Middle East and the United States, a situation it has long tried to avoid. But its economic troubles in Africa go far beyond just natural resources. Infrastructure projects, once a stronghold of French companies, are now being redirected to other international partners. Historically, firms like Vinci and Bouygues controlled the construction of highways, railways, airports, and hydroelectric dams across West Africa. These projects were often awarded through corrupt contracts that funneled billions of African taxpayer dollars into Paris, while local economies remained underdeveloped. However, the new leadership in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger is dismantling this system. French companies are being replaced by Chinese, Turkish, and Russian firms, which offer more equitable partnerships. Local African businesses are also being prioritized over French firms, ensuring that infrastructure investments stay within Africa instead of being siphoned off to Paris. One of the most striking examples of this shift is the collapse of the Bolaire Group, which once controlled Africa's largest network of ports, railways, and shipping routes. With Sahel nations severing ties with French infrastructure firms, France is losing billions in logistics revenue. This change is part of a larger trend, signaling that the days when France could dictate the economic policies of its former colonies are over. With its companies being expelled, supply chains cut off, and financial dominance shattered, France is now facing an economic crisis of historic proportions. For decades, the French economy was artificially sustained by Africa's natural wealth. But without access to cheap uranium from Niger, gold from Mali, oil from Chad, and minerals from Burkina Faso, France is losing its competitive edge in the global energy market. It's struggling with rising costs in nuclear power production, trying to maintain its trade dominance in West Africa, and watching once powerful French corporations crumble. What truly worries France, though, is the growing realization that the Sahel's rejection of French influence may inspire the rest of Africa to follow suit. Anti-French sentiment is already rising in other former colonies like Senegal and Chad. In countries like Cameroon, governments are starting to reconsider their economic dependence on France. Even in nations like Ivory Coast and Gabon, long considered loyal French allies, political movements are growing that call for an end to French economic domination. Meanwhile, BRICS nations are gaining more influence across Africa, offering trade and development deals that present an alternative to France's historically exploitative arrangements. If this trend continues, France risks losing its remaining strongholds in Africa, effectively cutting off the wealth that has sustained it for over a century. The economic decline of France in Africa goes beyond just business losses. It marks the collapse of an entire system of neo-colonial exploitation. The days when African wealth flowed into French banks while Africans remained impoverished are coming to an end. The Sahel nations have made it clear that France is no longer welcome to exploit their resources. Paris is now experiencing what former French President Jacques Chirac once warned. Without Africa, France is nothing, and with each passing day, Africa is proving that it can thrive without France. At the heart of this crisis is the collapse of France's economic model in Africa, a model built on extraction, control, and minimal reinvestment into African economies. Without Africa's resources, France is struggling to maintain its position as a global economic power. Interestingly, though, France is pushing for Air France's return. This isn't just about the airline, it's a strategic move. If France can force its way back in through Air France, it could open the door for other French corporations to follow, and potentially lay the groundwork for French diplomatic and even military re-engagement under the guise of economic cooperation. However, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are not fooled by this maneuver. The leadership of these countries has made it clear that France will not be allowed to re-enter through the back door. The notion that Africa cannot function without France has been thoroughly debunked. In reality, it is France that cannot function without Africa. This revolution is not just about expelling one airline, it's about dismantling an entire system of exploitation. The entire economic system France built to keep Africa under its control is now unraveling. The French government is experiencing firsthand what happens when a nation built on exploiting Africa suddenly loses its grip. The world is witnessing the rise of a new Africa that demands fair partnerships, respect, and economic justice. France, once the dominant power in the Sahel, is now realizing that without Africa's resources, it is no longer a superpower. What do you think? Will France accept its defeat and economic decline, or will it seek new ways to continue exploiting African resources? Share your thoughts in the comments below on what actions Ibrahim Traoré and other military leaders should take to ensure France can never return to Africa. If you want to see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the bell icon. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay tuned.